Today we're going to be taking a look back to 2025 of last year, looking at one of the worst droughts here in Nova Scotia, and according to government sources, it was actually the driest season that we've had on record yet. I'm Justin, and you're watching the Reptile and Conservation Garage. Last year in 2025, Nova Scotia experienced one of the worst droughts and a lot of wildfires. According to the Nova Scotia government, we had 197 wildfires that burned 8,848 hectares. The most wildfires in Nova Scotia that we have ever had on record was back in 2023 with over 220 wildfires, and it had burned over somewhere around 25,000 hectares of forest. There is no denying that droughts and wildfires here in Nova Scotia are becoming much more frequent, and that is due to a lot of factors. And of course, the obvious one is climate change. Nova Scotia historically is well known for its forestry industry, and throughout Nova Scotia's history, at least in the last 300 years, nearly all of Nova Scotia's forests have been cut at one point. And this actually led to a significant change in the landscape that originally would have been dominated by a diversity of old-growth trees. Now, to go back in time, before settlers came here just to see what it would have looked like, I think it would have been a pretty amazing experience. Today, we have less than 1%, some might estimate 5% of old-growth forest that's left. And this is because there could be some old-growth forest stands out there that have not yet been surveyed or studied. The old-growth policy didn't come into effect until 1999, and it was aimed to protect old-growth forest on Crown land. However, forest inventory goes back as far as 1958. Another thing to keep in mind is that roughly only 30% of land in Nova Scotia is government owned. The other 70% is privately owned. Forestry practices in Nova Scotia has always been an uphill battle, and yes, there has been many improvements, but in my opinion, it still needs a lot of work. Now, moving on to the next part of this video is where I'm actually going to be showing you guys the drought conditions that I had taken footage of back, I think it was towards the end of summer, moving into the beginning of fall. And also, I just want to warn you guys that there are a couple deceased turtles. So anyone who is sensitive to that type of material, just want to give you a fair warning on that. What you're looking at here is actually a very large wetland that is completely dried up. The wetland is also connected to a lake that is extremely low. In some places there is still some water below the surface, and that's why there are still some lily pads around that haven't completely dried up yet. When I walked up to the other end of the wetland, there was a small puddle with a small green frog hanging out in it and some more lily pads. This was the first sign of life that I saw in the wetland so far. When I finally made my way to the end of this wetland, it is also connected to another wetland, and this wetland still had a healthy amount of water in it. You see this large beaver dam that's holding the water back, and if it wasn't for this beaver dam, this wetland would also be dried up, because this wetland used to flow into the other wetland, which means that it more than likely would have drained itself dry. Beavers are not only masters at wetland engineering, they also help improve water quality and biodiversity, along with many other benefits, especially during droughts when you have so many other species that rely on wetlands for their survival. One of these species is the endangered Blanding's turtle. They can only be found in certain parts of Nova Scotia, and it's estimated that there are less than 500 adults remaining in the wild. And this particular wetland here actually holds one of those populations. When I was heading back, I also checked all of the offshoots that are connected to the main wetland. This is when I came across the painted turtle shell on its back. As I continued my survey, my findings got worse when I found the remains of a common snapping turtle. And then, not too far away, I came across another common snapping turtle that looked pretty fresh, and although its body was intact, its insides were completely cleaned out. Now here in Nova Scotia, an adult common snapping turtle is going to have very few predators, and that is because of their large size and their defensive behavior. However, there are a few predators here that will prey on snapping turtles if they get the opportunity, and those are black bears, coyotes, and river otters. Now there are two other predators also that most people probably don't think of, and those are crows and ravens. Crows and ravens are highly intelligent birds and amazing at problem solving. And what generally happens in this situation when they're trying to take out a large common snapping turtle, you're going to have one crow or raven at the front of the turtle distracting the head while the others are trying to flip it over on its back. Once that turtle is flipped over on its back, then it's vulnerable, because like most other turtles, the undershell, which is known as the plastron, is very small. It only covers like the center of the underbelly, and then the rest is all fleshy and exposed. So the crows and ravens will attack those vulnerable areas. Now there are a lot of ravens in this particular area that I did notice, and based on the evidence, there's no teeth marks, there's no claw marks on the turtle, just the big gaping hole in its underside. So this appears to be what had happened to this snapping turtle. There has also been other documented cases of similar incidents in this actual same area. And when you have these bad drought conditions and there's less water available, this makes turtles and other aquatic species vulnerable to a whole host of problems, including higher risks of predation. So this brings us to the end of today's video, and there's actually a part 2 that I'm working on, and it was on a different day at a different location. So stay tuned for that one, and thanks for watching.